Welcome everybody, and if you've been to any of our previous sessions, welcome back. Thank you for returning. If this is your first session, where the hell have you been? We've been having an amazing time talking about the menopause, and so we're back today, and today it's time to get practical. So I'm going to give up talking erectile dysfunction and vaginal dryness. Well, I can't entirely promise I'm going to give up talking about those, but I'm going to park those today and actually talk about how we put practical plans in place in workplaces. So, talk is great, and it's fantastic that we are raising the topic and talking about it in the way that we have been, and particularly with the support of Thrive, and knowing that they know that it's really important is great. But we need to kind of go, well, actually, what do we do with this as a topic? So, how do we put some practical things in place so that we start to change the world of work? So that's the focus for today. So there is a giveaway sheet that we've got that's like a crib sheet of things that you can look at, questions to ask, etc. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through, but it's all about actually taking action. So quitting talking about it, let's take some action. So for anybody that hasn't been here before, I'm Carolyn and I'm the midlife mistress, and I talk about the menopause. I don't just talk about that for a living, but it's one of the areas that I specialise in, not least because my history is in HR. So I've spent a lot of time working with a lot of people. And if you've been in any of the sessions we've had before, you'll know that despite nearly 25 years in HR, I never had anyone come to me and talk to me about either their menopause or the menopause of somebody that worked for them. So for me, it's a really important conversation that we need to have. Particular resonance for me personally, because I had premature ovarian insufficiency, which is a very lovely technical term for very early menopause. So my menopause started when I was 19, but I discovered it when I was 32, that my menopause had already been gone, and that part of my life was kind of done and over. So it's got personal resonance for me, which is why I like to talk about it. So today we're going to get practical. And what I think is really important is the understanding that nearly 75% of workplaces still don't have a menopause policy in place. So it really says that this is a very new and emerging area. So it's really important, if you are either in a workplace where you have some ability to put a policy in place, or you're interested in doing that, or you work in a role where you're working with other organizations. So you may be working with clients, and it's a conversation that you think either needs to be had in that organization or has started in that organization, that actually understanding that a menopause policy is a really good place to start. And we'll come on to that in a moment. But actually, it's about saying, okay, that it's an emerging topic. Still quite a lot of organizations that are not putting this in place. And interestingly, in that same survey, 15% of organizations, so 15% of organizations that were surveyed actually said they didn't really think it was an issue and it wasn't important to them. Now, I don't particularly want to be working in those organizations, but given the fact that, like I said, nearly 3/4 still don't have a policy, I would say there's probably quite a lot that either don't think that it's actually important, or in fact think it's important, or are starting to realize it's important, don't really know what to do about it. So that's really what today's session is all about. I think we've spent some time in previous weeks, if you've either been with us live or listened in, talking about why it matters as a topic, but now it's all about let's do something about it. So for me, it's actually about starting the conversation in the workplace. So again, it may well be that this is a workplace that you actually work in, or it might be a client that you're working with and you're helping to support them. I know that's something that Thrive do particularly well, of actually trying to create good workplace cultures and taking a holistic approach to employee well-being, and how do we create an environment where employees can turn up and be the best version of themselves, but actually bring all of themselves to the workplace. So I've started here with things that we should be asking in the workplace in order to start the conversation. And it's worth thinking about where that conversation starts. So who are you? going to talk to if you want to raise this conversation. And if you were around last week when we sort of talked about men and the menopause in the session that we had with Tom and Paul, and if you didn't see that, you'll be able to watch it on Catch Up and get the link from Nicole. But it's really about saying, who are you going to start this conversation with? Because I'm not saying that you have to just go straight in and try and get a slot in a board meeting, for example, and go straight in and try and raise this topic, because it is a topic that is tricky, difficult. There's lots of embarrassment that's still attached to it, as we've talked about in previous sessions. So my advice would be, maybe just pick somebody who you think would be a good ally. That might be a male ally, it might be a female ally. That's just about the nature of your workplace, but somebody who you think might have a little bit of an energy, whether that's an energy around employee well-being, might be somebody that has particularly got involved or invested in things like mental health first aiders. They're the kind of people that I think are a really good in for starting this conversation and saying, how do we talk about it in our workplace? But some of the things that I then think that we need to be asking. So we need to be looking at what the age demographic is of our employees overall. Now, the reason that's important is that I think it's important to look over, how does that age demographic change over a period of time? And not least, if you've been on previous sessions, you'll know that, whilst we have this perception of menopause kind of being older people, it's actually an average age of 51, which these days really isn't old at all. I say that as somebody who's approaching that age myself. But it's about saying that actually, because of the period of time that menopause goes on for, which could be up to 12 years, you really need to be looking at quite a breadth of your employee group. So well down into, I would say anything from 40 onwards. And again, my story, I know, means it happened even earlier. So opening up the conversation to everyone is important. But really, I think from sort of age 40, late 30s, 40, you really need to be looking at who do we have in our workforce overall. And also need to be looking at men, because as you know, really passionate about the fact that men are there and experiencing this with the women, whether that's as a partner, a line manager, a work colleague, it will be affecting their lives in some way as well. So it's not just about looking at the women, albeit that you do need to break that down, but actually looking at the whole of your workforce and understanding who might be experiencing this either personally or professionally. So it is about looking at what women you have, whereabouts they work, if you work in multiple locations, if people are working from home, if you've got hybrid working going on, just really understanding, who you've got, where they are, and actually sort of where you might want to concentrate your efforts in the first instance. So if you've got a high proportion of women in a particular area, particular function or location within your business, you might want to start there in terms of getting something going. Because again, you don't have to do everything all at once, don't have to tackle everyone all at once, but just, get some initiatives going. And then a really important question for me is about, to what extent do we think the menopause is an issue for our workforce? I actually think it's important to have that conversation, particularly when you're trying to gauge what kind of support that you're going to get within the organisation. Do we think this is a problem or not? Because actually, again, based on some of the statistics I shared just now, probably an awful lot of workplaces are still thinking this isn't really an issue. So it's really about having a bit of that moment of reflection and going, well, do we think this is important or not? Actually, is there something going on in the background here that we're not bringing to our attention? And really just then about, okay, so if somebody was to bring this up as an issue, what would we do? Like, how well equipped are we as a business if a woman raises a menopause matter with us? Where would we send them? What support would we give? Because again, as I've talked about previously, we do not need to be experts in anything medical whatsoever in order to support somebody. And it really is ill-advised to try and be that expert and try and give advice. But in itself, we do need to give support. So we need to then start looking at where might we need to do something and who might we need to equip with a bit more information so that we can, help those women when they come forward and create an environment where they can actually raise this issue. And then it is about, like, what do we actually want to do in our workplace? Because what I am going to come on to is all sorts of ideas of things that you can do and look at. Some of these things don't have to cost you anything at all as an organisation, and I think that's important. There are things you can do and invest in that will cost money, but there are also things you can do that don't. But we also need to make sure that if we are going to do something as an organisation, that we do actually believe in it and that we are actually going to do something about it. And it's not just going to be a, okay, like, we better do something about that, a tick box exercise, kind of give it to HR and like we can say we're doing something about it. Now, another one is, how can we let employees know that it's safe to talk about the menopause here? So this is about cultural change. And again, which is why I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and doing this session alongside Thrive, because I think this is one of the things that they really excel at. Like I said, that holistic approach to how do we make cultures better? How do we make the work experience really great for employees? So it is about trying to create that safe space in the first instance. And that's why I've put the next question on there. And it is one of my recommendations in terms of practical things to do. There is something out there that's called the Menopause Workplace Pledge. Now, this is a national initiative. It's based on an organisation called Wellbeing of Women. And you can sign up to their pledge to make workplaces menopause friendly and actually create an environment. Now, again, I know it's about just potentially ticking a box, but it's a really good place to start because it's actually saying, as an organisation, we are signing up to this pledge. And over 600 employers and some really big ones, people like Tesco, for example, have signed up to this Menopause Workplace Pledge. And it's a really good way to start to indicate we are going to talk about the menopause and we're going to make this menopause friendly. Absolutely fine if you then say to your employees, we're not quite sure how we're going to do that yet, but we recognise that this is an important issue and we're taking the first step by saying we want to create an environment where people can raise this if it's an issue for them. So you have to ask yourself, though, is the organisation prepared to sign up to it? Because you're publicly making that pledge. So you need to be able to stand behind it in terms of your actions matching your words. And then it's about, okay, creating an environment is about supporting line managers particularly. So how can we help them to feel more comfortable with talking about the menopause? So what is it that we want to do in the first instance as an organisation that will help them feel, okay, maybe less comfortable, but maybe a little less uncomfortable about talking about the menopause if somebody comes forward and says, I think this is what's happening to me, I think it's affecting my work. Or if a male colleague comes along or a male direct report and says, actually, my wife is struggling with this and it's having impacts on me. So, for example, as I've talked about before, you know, there's a lot of sleepless nights, night sweats, so lots of disturbed sleep that will be happening to a woman, but actually that could be impacting any man that shares a bed with her, that then is disrupted in the night, having to get up, change bed sheets, lots of disrupted sleep could be impacting a man's performance in his job as well if he's having to deal with that at home. So we need to make sure that conversation is open. And it's about, you know, where and how can we provide that support? So it's not necessarily about inventing entirely new things. Are there already internal mechanisms that we have in place that we can use? So do we have first aiders? Most organisations, absolutely yes. Do we have mental health first aiders? In a lot of organisations now, yes, and that's becoming even more important on the back of the pandemic and the mental health impact that that's had. So those are places where you could actually provide some extra training to those individuals who then might then be able to be a support mechanism for, again, either employees or line managers that might need support and somebody to talk to with a little bit more knowledge and help. But then obviously, what external help might we need? Do we need to look elsewhere? And I talk about, you know, needing potentially a menopause policy, which we know isn't the solution to everything. It's just a policy unless we put it into action. But places like Thrive, where they already have a menopause policy template that you can use, no need to reinvent the wheel at all. There is already lots of stuff emerging. And like I said, Thrive is on the front foot of that. So if you are working with other organisations, if you work for an organisation other than Thrive and you're watching this, they already have a menopause policy that you can take and use and adapt for your workplace. And then who should be the primary sponsor of any menopause initiative? And I, you know, really want to talk about the fact that we mentioned it in the conversation we had last time about men. But actually, Tom made a fantastic suggestion that actually that primary sponsor ideally should be a senior man. It's a reality of life that's still in most organizations, not all, absolutely not all, but in most organizations, a lot of the very senior decision makers are still male, because they do sit majority, that's just statistically correct. That there's more men at the top of organizations than there are women. It would be great if we could get a male ally to be the primary sponsor. Again, I'm quite passionate about the fact that it shouldn't just be outsourced to HR and they can deal with the sort of women and the fluffy stuff, that actually, if you're really mean it as an organization, then having a senior male sponsor, I think, is a great message to send. So that's places to start in terms of questions to ask to get the conversation going. So then, like I said, how do we get practical? So what can companies do, and why would these be important? So educating the senior leaders, so just helping them to understand why this is an issue, really helping them to understand the impacts and the magnitude and the importance of the issue. So we need to think, about things like absence, and telling them the impact that menopause is statistically shown to have on absence, albeit that it's not reported within the organisation as menopause, that those women are typically taking quite a lot of time off in some cases, or might have lots of short-term absence, odd days here and there, where they're really struggling with their symptoms, but actually they won't be reporting it as related to the menopause, because some of them might not even know that. So that's why we need to raise the topic and the initiative. But it's going to have impacts on absence, impacts on productivity, and impacts on retention. Those will grab the attention of senior leaders, whether or not the reason for it is the menopause. It's like, we've got these things that either are or could be impacting absence, productivity, and retention in our organisation, and all of those things cost money. So these are why you should find it important, aside from what it means for our employees and engagement and their well-being. Like I said, appoint a senior sponsor, preferably a man if you can, but just somebody who's passionate about it, who will, be the figurehead and the champion of it, and really get the initiative going in the organisation. So somebody who might announce that you've signed up to the Menopause Workplace Pledge, for example, and sort of put themselves out there and behind it, saying, we see this as important. So I've mentioned the Menopause Workplace Pledge. On today's giveaway document, I've got the link for that, so you can see where you can get hold of that. But if you just Google it online, it should take you straight there. So like I said, it's Wellbeing of Women is the organisation that's doing that. And you can sign up to it either as an employee or as an employer, but the more employers we can get on, the better. Mentioned about a menopause policy, which I do think is really important. A policy in itself, like I said, is just words and not action. But the very fact of having a policy and introducing a policy and saying to the organisation, we now have a policy around this issue, and we are going to roll out some conversation and some training about it, is just at least a flag in the sand that says, here is a topic that matters, and it matters so much, and it's not going away, because it isn't going to go away. This is going to affect women for evermore, unless they find a cure for it. But menopause is an issue that's here to stay, and we're putting that flag in the sand and saying, this is really important, that we're going to have a policy that sits behind it. So at least it's an initiative in its own right. But also review your existing policies if you've got any influence over that, again, either in your workplace or ones that you're working with. Just things to consider. A lot of organizations are looking at their workwear policy. So if you do have any kind of company workwear, uniform, safety equipment, anything that needs to be worn and is mandatory for employees to wear, then it's worth looking at those policies. A lot of companies are trying to move away from, example, man-made fabrics and things that might be particularly uncomfortable to wear for a woman that's having hot flushes and finding it difficult to regulate her body temperature. Then lots of companies are looking at their workwear and moving over to different types of fabrics, or loosening up those policies so that women, everybody has more choice in terms of what they might wear, but making sure that means that they're comfortable. Looking at performance and talent review processes. And the reason that I've included this is that when we've talked in sessions before, it's very much been about, women sort of reaching that point where they go, actually, I've got brain fog, I've got low mood, anxiety, memory problems, and other symptoms related to the menopause, and I'm finding it difficult to perform my job. And there's lots of evidence that says that women either resign from the organisation, they don't go for promotions they would otherwise go for, or they step back from doing certain projects or whatever. So you need to make sure that your performance and talent review processes allow you to have that conversation with those women that may be impacted, or at least start to spot that, you know, again, how many, you know, people are being promoted. Let's look at the age demographic of those. Let's look at the gender of those, which we should be doing anyway. But I know, I've been in HR for a really long time, that we don't always do that. That we go, oh, so-and-so, he works really hard and does really long hours, let's promote him. But we need to make sure that it's robust and fair. And also things like absence policy. So what a lot of organizations are doing are reviewing their absence policies in light of the menopause, and sort of taking a different approach with regards to time off for things like medical appointments. So it might be that doctor's appointments then become paid time off if it's related to menopausal symptoms. Again, I've talked about the fact that lots of women have to go to the doctor lots of times before they start to get help. So you have to bear in mind that a woman might have to go for, I think it's 6+ appointments for quite a large percentage of women before they start getting the treatment that they really need. So we need to bear in mind that if somebody's asking for lots of bits of time off, or going early or coming in late, we need to be having that conversation with her about like what's going on here and can we support you, because she may either not know she's going through the menopause or not want to tell you that she's going through the menopause. So that's about trying to initiate that conversation, but actually start to look for some of those patterns, because companies now are starting to change policies to say that, you know, time off for GP appointments and other medical appointments related to the menopause will be paid, for example, or allowed for. Which comes on to about reviewing healthcare provision. Now, like I said, you know, some of these things will cost money, some of them won't. It will depend on whether you have any healthcare provision in place and what it provides for. But if you are an organisation that does this, whether it's one of the more generic schemes that's open to all your employees, whether it's there for private healthcare that may sometimes be afforded only to certain grades and levels of employee, usually the more senior levels, worth reviewing what they have in place. Again, organisations are now starting to look at, you know, is there specific provision within healthcare provision to allow women time off for medical appointments related to the menopause, but also whether that private healthcare provision will actually support and fund appointments or other treatments that might be related to menopause. So it's worth looking at that provision. Can it be extended? Can it be amended to make sure that sort of menopause appointments and treatment is within there? So it's just worth having a look at that and checking. You can utilize technology to gain insights. We talked about this, I think it was in last week's session, and I think a previous one with Paul and with Tom from Thrive. But I know that they've got the technology they use is Loop-In, so it actually just checks in on a regular basis with employees about how they are and how they're feeling. So using something like that, putting that kind of technology in place, which is a, you know, just a rating level of this is how I'm feeling. Obviously, like we talked about when we did the session before, you need to do something with that data. No good asking people and then go, oh yeah, whatever. We need to actually do something with the information, but utilize that technology, gain those insights, and use it as a way of you know, starting that conversation. Appointing and train menopause advocates or champions, whatever you want to call them, I think is a fantastic way forward. You know, those people that have some extra training that then is menopause specific. It may be different individuals to your first aid people or your mental health first aid people, but it may well also be the same ones, but providing some extra training so there is somewhere for individuals to go and for line managers to go to get some extra help and support if they're dealing with issues related to the menopause. It's not about trying to make them experts, but it's just some additional guidance that they can have, and that can just be a really good cost-effective way to A, demonstrate your support, and B, create that environment where there are people that women can go to. There is still a lot of embarrassment and shame around talking about the menopause, so having appointed people that can have that conversation and understand is a really good way of getting that cultural change within your business. Training first line managers, so training them on a policy if you introduce a policy, which I would recommend, but again, giving them some additional training about just terminology, things that might come up, things they should be aware of in terms of symptoms, things that they can do that might alleviate those symptoms. So for example, hours become more flexible in a particular functional department. Is it possible just for a woman to move and sit by a window that will open as opposed to sitting by the radiator? Really simple things that sometimes can be done if line managers are just a little bit more aware of what would help. Holding menopause support groups is also a really good way to, again, just sort of raise that conversation, change the culture. I know of a few organisations that are doing this now where they have, say, just a monthly group that women can go to and just talk to other women who either suspect that they might be going through the menopause or are going through the menopause and just want to talk about the experience as it is for them. So it's a really great way to just give a little bit of time out and say, here is a space where you can talk to each other. I know some organisations, my sister happens to work for one, where it's very female heavy, and they have it on Zoom on a monthly basis. So it doesn't always necessarily need to be face to face. You can facilitate this stuff on Zoom. Now, sometimes I've put in there about one-to-one emergency support. So there are lots of statistics around, I talked about before, sort of anxiety, low mood, panic attacks, but just also, some of the fallout from the menopause, particularly for women. But this is, I put in this emergency support for line managers too, that you might want to just have someone that you can contact that just, very quickly within, 24 hours or less, will be able to have a conversation either with a line manager that's really concerned about a colleague that is going through the menopause or needs support with it, or the individual themselves, where it's like, look, just in an instant, we'll get you some longer term help or help you work with your GP. But right now, there's an immediate concern that we might want to hold some of these sessions as an emergency support for somebody, just to ground them a little bit, give them a little bit of guidance and let them know that that support is there. Unfortunately, I'm going to say it because it is what it is that there is, quite a lot of evidence as well that suicide is unfortunately a devastating impact of menopause. Anybody that knows me and has listened to me before knows that I listen a lot to Dr. Louise Newsom, who is a menopause specialist. She reserves a slot at every single one of her clinics for an emergency slot for a woman that is feeling suicidal as a result of her menopause symptoms, and particularly because she's not getting help from the medical system. Now, I'm not saying you put that kind of support in place in your workplace, but you might just need something and somewhere that you can call that will just give that emergency immediate support. So it's worth thinking about doing that. And then finally, it's about thinking about the long term. If we're going to set this culture in terms of the menopause, then it's thinking about induction training. Could you put a video in place? Could you train people about the policy? How do you run your induction training? But it's really important to say, if you're going to sign up to the Menopause Workplace Pledge, have a policy, amend other policies, make your culture the right one to support women going through the menopause and the men that might be supporting them. How can you talk about that in your current induction schedules? Do you need to put something new and specific in? Just thinking about how that's run and making sure that you sort of provide that as a really early entry for every employee that comes to your organization and going, we are setting out our stall. We are menopause friendly in this workplace, so that everybody knows when they get there. And again, that's the way that we will remove the stigma for everybody really, and make the conversation just less embarrassing to have in the first instance. So that's a whistle-stop tour of questions that you might need to ask, things that you can do, ideas and suggestions of practical things that you can do. Like I said, the giveaway sheet that we've got this time covers both of those and puts a little bit more detail around them, but just really to help you get started and prompt some thinking and some changes in behavior and action. Because like I said, talk is one thing, action changes things significantly. But just want to leave you, as I love a statistic. So just want to let you know that 62% of women report feeling invisible when their menopause happens. So it is really about making sure we say that we're standing next to you, ladies. We hear you, we see you, and we want to walk with you and support you through this journey. So it's really important to do that. And finally, my final point is, like, if nothing changes, then nothing changes. So it really is about time that we start doing something different so that we can change the workplace for women. And that's me. It's been amazing to be here for the last 4 weeks. Thank you to everybody that's joined in, listened back, and been part of it. Thank you to Tom and to Paul in particular, who have got into the discussion. And I have to say a big thank you to Nicole, who I'm going to miss on a weekly basis, because we always have a little bit of a 10 or 15 minute chat before the session starts. So Nicole's done a fantastic job of doing all the practical stuff in the background, but also just of chatting to me before each session. So thank you to Nicole in particular. Is there any questions that anybody has based on what I've said today, or in previous weeks for that matter? Anybody want to come off mute, ask any questions?
Hi Caroline, it's Grania. I'm not going to put my camera on. I was really impressed by the talk. I think that's the biggest thing I'm taking away, is having a man as a senior manager to influence. I'm hoping to, I work for a large organization and I'm hoping to get something done. So this has been really, really helpful. I'm sorry I missed the first two, but hopefully I can watch.
Oh, you can get them on catch up. You can get them on catch up if you Nicole and I were talking beforehand, so they will be ready to go out live. There will be a link to those, so if you want to watch those, you can do too.
Yeah, well, it's been really useful, and such a pertinent issue. Like, what is it, 3.5 million women are going to go through the menopause?
Yeah, well, it's going to happen to pretty much every woman. So 51% of the world's population are female, and pretty much every single one of them is going to go through it in some way, shape or form. So it's a huge issue.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Really appreciate it. If there's any follow-up you want to do, then let me know.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything from anybody else before we finish?
I just want to say thank you so much, Carolyn. This has been a great series, and I think everyone's taken so much from it. We'll be sharing the YouTube links to all the sessions on the Thrive Law socials, so keep an eye out for those.
Great, good stuff. And I know people can get the takeaway sheets as well, can't they? As
yes.
You guys as well. So there's been one for each session. So yeah, if people want those, they can follow up as well. But like I said, I'm not going to be here on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock going forward, or not for a while anyway. So I'll not be around, but I'm not going anywhere. So if anybody wants to get in touch at all, then by all means, get in touch with me either through my website. You can message me on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn, or get in contact with me on my mobile. But I'd be really happy to follow up with anybody that would want some further help and support, either personally or in their organisation. It'd be my pleasure to do that. Thank you very much.